Welcome to Confessions of an Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in.
Hey, on the show today, we've got Jon Weening. We just had an amazing conversation for the last hour, and we talked about the 5 businesses that he's been a part of, playing in both the visionary and the integrator role, what it's like being in both of those roles, especially at the same time. We talked about the idea of having 2 people in the same seats and the challenges that come with that. We talked about family business, a lot about family business, and the value of everybody getting on the same page and understanding why the company exists. What are those core values? And also understanding, like, what are some of those early warning signs that things may not be right? And that applies not just to family business, but if you have a lifelong friend that you've been in business with, or you're considering starting a business and you're looking for a partner, how you can align early to ensure that it's going to be a successful journey and everybody is rowing in the same direction. And then if you stay till the very end, as we were about to hang up, we got into a pretty good conversation about core values, the exercises that you run with core values, and the importance of everybody being aligned around those core values. So I hope you enjoyed the show and stay tuned. Let's start with the easy stuff, which is your visionary and your integrator experience with several different businesses, 5 different businesses over the last 20 years. One of the things that's really interesting and that I hear a lot in the EOS world is the rarity of having someone that is both a great visionary and a great integrator. And it sounds like you have both juggled and have had accountability or responsibilities within both of those roles. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. In my last business, I definitely had to play both parts. I am wired slightly more as a visionary. But yeah, I think in the book, Rocket Fuel, they talk about that. It's like 4% of the visionary integrator population is really great at both or enjoys doing both. And I think there's a crystallizer report that helps you assess that. And I think I'm like 84% visionary and 74 or 75% integrator or something like that. So I do have a slight tendency towards the visionary side. But in my last business, prior to becoming an EOS implementer, definitely played lots of integrator role. Less so in the last couple of years. We had hired a key person who we weren't officially running on EOS. So we didn't use that term integrator, but we hired somebody who definitely took on that role of integrator, our manufacturing plant. And it was huge. It was a game changer for me in terms of my enjoyment of my work life.
So when you talk about kind of both of these roles, it sounds like you can do both of them. Which one, do you have one that you prefer, that you enjoy more than the other one?
Yeah, I definitely prefer the visionary side of things. So if there's something I don't miss from my last business, it is the whole managing of people, leading, managing, holding people accountable. We call it LMA in EOS, and I don't miss that part of it. And so as an EOS implementer, it's interesting because my last business, yeah, we had lots of employees, and leading and manage people was definitely part of it. Today, as an EOS implementer, we're more of a solopreneur. I've got a fantastic practice manager / admin that looks after a lot of the stuff that I'm not good at and don't enjoy doing, but it's not like I'm having to manage a lot of people. And so I don't miss that aspect of it. And that's probably one of the most important key aspects to being a really great integrator is leading and managing your leadership team in the company.
And have you stepped into an integrator role where there was already a visionary, or have your experiences in that integrator role always been kind of dual-hatted in both the visionary and integrator role?
I would say, yeah, never have I been in an integrator role where there was a visionary in place. No. So it was definitely playing both roles for most part.
That's interesting. Because that's the juggle that I always find a big struggle. So I'm in the Navy Reserves, and when I'm doing Navy work and I have a boss, I can be a high performer, and whether that's like getting ahead of what the boss's needs or kind of understanding the things that need to happen or just taking direction and orders or following process, I'm pretty good at that. And maybe it's just like the competitive spirit or whatever comes from that drive. And then when I'm in the visionary role, mostly in an entrepreneurial capacity, very rarely in the military, there's no one telling me what to do. And so I'm able to kind of spread my wings and fly. But many times when I've sat in both roles, it's a struggle for me because it's like, I want to do all these things. And then I'm actually doing all these things. And then I'm just constantly in this place of where I'm burning myself out. So that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I can totally relate to that. So
what was your last company? So where you were in that integrator and visionary role?
yeah, so although I've been involved in a partner or ownership perspective in several different 5 businesses over the years, the majority of my career prior to becoming an EOS implementer, the majority of my time was spent in a custom equipment design and manufacturing company that actually 2 of my older brothers had started a couple of years prior to me joining it. So they started the company in 1985, I believe. I graduated high school in 1993. And so I had worked there part-time for a couple summers prior to that. Took a year off school between high school and college, totally lost, didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. It's funny because there was a lot of different career paths that crossed my plans or my mind or my vision for the future throughout my schooling years, but left high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I took a year off, then decided to go into marketing at school. So took business marketing in college, did 1 year of that, and ironically dropped out. That wasn't my thing either. And so kind of defaulted back into that family business. So the company, when I really joined it full time, was 10 years old, probably at that time, maybe 8 years old.
What was the last company? And when you walked into the company, so it's your brother's company, they had started this, it sounds like 6-ish years before you graduated high school. You're trying to figure out what your path, what your journey is. Dropped out of the marketing program. I was in the marketing program as well. I wasn't able to drop out just because the whole Navy thing. So when you walked into your brother's company, what did you start off as?
So when I was part-time while going through high school, I was assembling, painting equipment, machining, like doing all kinds of stuff in the shop. So I'm a hands-on person, but have really learned that that's not my calling. I don't actually enjoy that, but I did a lot of the work in the shop. And then when I came back full-time after my 1 year of college, I ended up in more of a, oh my goodness, they're cutting the grass out. When I came back full-time after that 1 year of college, then I ended up in more in an office position and doing quoting and sales. And that kind of morphed into a whole bunch of different positions within the company over the years, to where in 2007 or 8 is ultimately where I ended up in a position where I was leading the company with one of my brothers, who was then my business partner. One of the brothers had exited at that point. And yeah, so it's funny because when I talk about, you had asked about my last business. So my first business was also my last business. So that one was sort of a continual journey for 27 years, probably. It was my first job in high school, ended up joining that company as a partner in 2004, started running the company in 2007 or 8, like I said. But then some of the other ventures that I was part of, they always were alongside that. I was always involved in that company for the entire journey prior to becoming an EOS implementer. So that same business with my brothers was ultimately the business that I was in right before becoming an EOS implementer.
And so how does that work? I've been in business with friends before when I've had businesses that were taking off very quickly and I had to find incredible people that come in and help. I looked into my network. I looked in my friend groups. I would say many times it didn't work the way that I thought it would work. There's one good friend who I've been a business partner with several times, and that's been kind of the lucky one, the rarity. And so you are in business with your family, and not just your family, but 3 brothers. It sounds like one had exited. So how does that work? When you started running the company, was the other brother sitting in the owner's box while the other brother had already exited? When you think about that in terms of EOS, how did that operation look?
Yeah, so it's funny because you reminded me of something there. So yes, there was 3 of us in an ownership position, but it's funny. So I have 5 brothers, and at some point along the journey, all 5 of us were involved in that business, with 3 of us being there pretty much from the start to the end. Anyway, so I'm the 7th of 8 kids, and the company was founded by my oldest brother and my 3rd oldest brother. And my oldest brother, 100% is complete visionary through to the core. Risk taker, big idea person, hard to stay really focused on anything for a long time, and probably not great at execution. Needed to build a team around him, which is what great visionaries do. And so, whereas my other brother, the other business partner in that, he's more of a hands-on kind of a doer as opposed to visionary, but not wired as an integrator, I wouldn't say, although that's probably the role he played for the first at least 10 years in the business. Is your audience familiar with this whole visionary integrator that we keep talking about?
I think so by now, because we talk about it so much. I would assume that people that started listening in the beginning are like, this isn't for me. I don't understand anything they're talking about. So I think by this point, we're getting a couple thousand downloads a month, which is an exciting time. And they keep coming back. So I think they do understand what the visionary integrator is. And if not, then we'll just direct them to rocket fuel.
There you go. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. Is the two founders, one was definitely visionary. And so he's the one that actually exited at one point. So we started another company in 2000, the three of us, a farm and equipment construction dealership. And so the three of us together ran both the manufacturing business. I don't know if I even talked about that. So the original business was a custom equipment design and manufacturing business, primarily focused on agricultural equipment, vegetable handling equipment, so washing, grading, sizing equipment for like carrots, onions, and potatoes. And then we started this dealership in around 2000 or 2001, and it sold a variety of construction and farm equipment. And so it was around 4 years after that where we sort of parted ways as three business owners. And so my oldest brother, who was the founder of the original company, he took over sole ownership of the farm and construction equipment dealership. It was called Trinity Equipment Sales. And my other brother, who was one of the founders, and myself continued on with Weening Brothers, or WBM as it was known, Weening Brothers Manufacturing. And so, yeah, it was interesting because when that transition took place, so I was full-time in the business and more in a sales role, but I naturally evolved into more of that visionary seat when my other visionary brother had exited the business.
Got it. And what was the driving factor in kind of starting up a new business? It sounds like it's in a similar category. It does something different, but a new entity was started kind of in the same industry. Why not just launch that underneath the existing business?
It's a good question. So it felt different enough that it made sense to have its own name, its own group of employees. So it's funny. I don't know if this is what caused it. I'm sure it wasn't what caused it, but something that comes to mind is me having a real heart-to-heart conversation with a visionary brother. His name's Fred. So we'll just refer to it. It's Fred and Ron were my two business partners. And so I remember having a conversation. It was probably in maybe 1997 or 98, shortly after I got married, was full-time in the business. We were working out of a small manufacturing shop in our office. We had outgrown the building. We had an office inside the manufacturing facility and we just needed the space. And so we had put one of those construction trailers outside. And so our office was in this construction trailer beside the manufacturing plant. And anyway, it was a great stopgap. But I just remember thinking, I wanted something more. We needed to grow this business. And so it was around that time we started talking about, my brother Fred was looking at a piece of property. And over the next couple of years, we developed this plan. We brought some shareholders on and we actually built a new manufacturing facility. And that building was designed, it was a purpose-built building specifically to house both the manufacturing company and the dealership company. And so as to why we started a different one, they felt different enough that it didn't make sense to do it under the same roof. As to why we did it, I would say it's because we didn't have a clear vision and we didn't have what we call a core focus in EOS, which is why you're in business and what you do. And we did not have clarity around that. So then every opportunity looks like a good opportunity. And so whether it made sense or not, it was a good learning experience.
One of the things that this reminds me of, I was talking to Beth Fahey, and she's a certified EOS implementer, and her specialty or her business, which I think was family. It was family. It was with her sister, and it was a bakery, and her sister had a bakery, but I don't think any experience in baking, but wound up like learning on the fly and doing incredible things. And then Beth came in and helped really kind of add that gasoline to the growth. And one of the things that she talked about is the bakery was doing amazing and they were exploding and doing these intricate cakes and all these incredible things. And they were like, we should open up a restaurant, a little like deli where people can come and eat great sandwiches because that's what our town's missing. And so they did it. And they spent about 2 years now kind of split between these two businesses and were having trouble in one. And eventually came to a place of where they shut down the sandwich shop and went all in on the bakery again, got it back on track and did amazing things. And so when you think about starting up this other business, and you kind of alluded to it when you were like, without a core focus, every opportunity looks like a great opportunity and you wind up getting stretched. When you guys did this, did it work? Or did you find that your attention, your focus was now split between too many things?
I would say, so did it work? It worked for a short period. Was it profitable, which is obviously an important aspect? The dealership side of the business probably was never really profitable. And so it was a case of being the three of us probably stretched too thin, not only with our time, but with financial resources too. Finances were always a challenge. We had just done this big building project. And then I remember it was a bit of a downturn. For some reason, we were in one of our slowest periods in the manufacturing side of the business shortly after moving into this beautiful new facility where our expenses had probably maybe not 10x, but they had jumped significantly all of a sudden. Resources were just spread too thin, probably.
When did you discover EOS? Was that during this business and you read the book Traction or something, someone handed you something, and you're like, this looks amazing? Or did you already understand EOS? You were trying to self-implement or convince your brothers that it was this amazing new system?
Ironically, I was not introduced to EOS until after I exited that business. This will take us down a little bit of a different path, but my introduction to EOS came about 6 months after exiting that business. And I can tell you how I found out about that, but I'll first give some background as to what we were using in the manufacturing business. And so I was part of a coaching program called Entrepreneurial Leadership. If you're in the US, good chance you've probably heard of Dave Ramsey. So Dave Ramsey, he's kind of a money guy, I guess, but he has a really great business coaching program on the side called Entrepreneurial Leadership. And so I was part of his coaching program for several years, had a coach in there, and it was a huge growing period in my own business and leadership journey. And then that somehow led me to a different system called Scaling Up. And so we had started implementing that in our business. And it was implementing that system that ultimately led probably me and my brother realizing that we were just on different pages with where to take the company in the future. And that ultimately led to this kind of separating in terms of a business partnership. And so we scaled that business back, sold off a part of the business. He still runs it today on a much smaller scale, probably in line with more his vision for it, but definitely not in line for my vision. Family relationships, super important to me, more important than a business. And so I could tell it was definitely driving a wedge. We had a 5-year period probably. We had some really tough conversations, oftentimes not pleasant conversations. And it was going through that scaling up implementation that drove us to realize probably we needed to go in different directions. And it's all worked out in the end. But when I exited that, because I had been part of Entree Leadership, avid reader, was part of John Maxwell's Maximum Impact program, just always really focused on learning and growing. And it had been a game changer in our own business. We had made some really significant and positive changes over probably a 5-year period in our business. When I exited it, I was piecing together my own system. It was called the 4F 7-pillar model. And looking back in hindsight, probably would have never worked. But it was me piecing together my own thing based on Entree Leadership, based on the book Good to Great, which is one of the first books we get our clients to read as part of the EOS implementation. And so it was in January of 2019. So this is about 6 months after exiting the business. I was working on putting my own thing together and ran into the father of a high school friend who I hadn't seen in years. And so we started chatting. Turns out I was asking him about his son, Grant, who was a buddy of mine and who I hadn't talked to in years. And he was starting a consulting business at the time. We got connected jumped on a Zoom call. This is right before COVID, this is a year before COVID hit. We jumped on a Zoom call, connected, and he is actually the one that told me about the book Traction. And so I read the book Traction. I read it over the course of a weekend, and I said to my wife, I'm scrapping this whole thing that I'm working on. Where was EOS for the last 10 years of my life? I don't discount this. This isn't me trashing Scaling Up. There's lots of great operating systems out there, and they're not all the same, and they probably don't all suit every business the same. But for our size business, EOS, we always say our EOS is designed for companies with 10 to 250 employees. It's kind of our sweet spot. We were about 20 or 25 employees or so. And I wish I had read this book earlier. And it's so funny enough, looking back in some of the correspondence in the Facebook group with my Entree Leadership coaching program, the book Traction had been mentioned several times, but you know how it's that whole thing, you buy a car and all of a sudden you see that car in that color all over the road. And so it was kind of the same thing, I guess, with traction. But that was my introduction to traction. And I just scrapped everything I was working on and decided to become an EOS implementer.
Nice. And I have the book sitting to my right, Scaling Up. I bought it when I was in Newport. I have not read it yet, but what are some of the key differences? Because one of the things that you spoke about was EOS is really set up for businesses that are between 10 and 250. That's really the sweet spot. And basically, it would have been a better tool for your former business. Like, where did Scaling Up fall short?
So I don't know if it was a case of falling short. From my perspective, it was just more complex. EOS is a simple system, and we often talk about that it's really simple. The tools are simple, but it's not easy. It's challenging to implement for sure. And that's obviously what the role of the EOS implementer is to help make that process go smoothly. We had self-implemented with Scaling Up. So that was maybe one of the downsides right there. And lots of people successfully implement EOS, and probably lots of people successfully implement Scaling Up. But hiring a coach it certainly is a faster road to success and a more guaranteed road to success. And so we didn't do that. So I certainly don't want to knock Scaling Up in any way or necessarily speak to the downsides of it, because I don't even know what Scaling Up necessarily considers its target market. But in my mind, it's more suitable for a larger company.
As a recovering self-implementer myself, I can say there is tremendous value of bringing someone through the door. We had scaled Hunt to Kill Group, probably about a $10 million company when we first introduced EOS into the organization. And basically, I was in Vistage. So like you, I was in a peer leadership growth type of community group. We had an EOS implementer that came through. We ran an exercise. They said, read the book Traction. I did that. I said, this is it. Like, this is for us. We self-implemented for a couple of years, and it was night and day. Like, the amount of traction that we were able to get with these systems and processes was incredible, but we kind of piecemealed it. And so while it was an amazing improvement for the organization, fast forward 2 years later, where we brought Margaret Dixon out of Boulder, Colorado in to help us. And she was like, what the hell are you guys doing? And so we went through a whole nother transformation. And so we did great things on our own, but what you can do with an expert that can give that perspective, that outside perspective and observation of watching how the team orients and interacts and engages, it's invaluable. And so anyhow, just to pile onto your comments of like, when you can afford it, a certified implementer, expert implementer, professional implementer, like, they can change the course.
Yeah, for sure. So recently, one of my graduated clients just joined our EOS community, and it's so fun having him in the community. He self-implemented for 3 years. We worked together for 2 years, and he got to the point where, he was no longer needed in the day-to-day. I think he spends about 1 day a week in his insurance company, and now is basically a full-time EOS implementer. And it's cool to see that transition take place. So
that's awesome. One of the things that you had mentioned was some of the tough conversations that you were having with your brother. And one thing that has been maybe not surprising, or it shouldn't be surprising, but was surprising to me, is there's a lot of organizations out there that are family companies that are implementing EOS. I don't know if that was intentional on the EOS model and marketing and those types of things, but there's a lot of family businesses that are implementing EOS. So this might be valuable to other people that are listening to this and either self-implementing or have an implementer and run a family business. Like, what are some early signs where you notice that things aren't right? Like, we're not aligned?
From my own personal experience, and I have some recent client experiences that would probably fit this conversation too. But from my own personal experience, I would say, like in ours, it was just glaringly obvious that I wanted to grow the business. I wanted to build a team. I just was more focused on building leaders within the company. Delegating and elevating is ultimately what we call it. Whereas my business partner and brother, he was more hesitant to let go of the reins, probably. Let go of the vine is the term that we use. So it just felt like we were constantly clashing, because that, I think in a nutshell, is what it was, just different visions for the future. And so I wanted to grow, and I'm not sure he wanted to grow. So grow the business.
And when you think about things like that, like, is it a dollar amount? One of the things that you keyed in on was the idea of hiring people. And there's a certain amount of risk that comes with hiring people. Like, as you're growing, Now there's additional risk. Now you have to hire for that growth, or you have to hire before the growth to either add the infrastructure or go out and get the sales team. And so are these things where it's as easy as saying like, I would like to grow this business to be $10 million and 50 employees, and we're in the owner's box. And eventually we get to a point of where we have our own kind of integrator that's in the seat, and all we're doing each year is collecting a paycheck. Is it a conversation like that? Or is it a conversation of like, we have different styles, we're different leaders, the whole idea of elevating and delegating, things like that?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. We had different styles, we had different priorities, like different things mattered to us. I think it's a combination of all of those things. And it ultimately was the conversation around where we want to go in the future, which was part of that implementing scaling up, just like it would be part of the EOS conversation when you're building out your vision traction organizer and setting a 10-year target. When we were talking about the future and really trying to hone in on our core focus and what it was we did great and what we shouldn't do, because we ultimately, even at that point, we were not very focused. We took on a lot of different opportunities, some of which probably should have, and some maybe that we shouldn't have. But there was so many different areas where we just kind of didn't see eye to eye on. So
one of the things you said there that I think is really important is what matters. And this almost reminds me of like, even you could put it into some exercise. Like, is there an exercise that you either do or could run your clients through that either have business partners that they are intimately familiar with or business partners that are a part of a family, where you can list out what matters prior to getting in business? Like if someone's considering the idea of getting into business with family or getting into business with their childhood friend, what can they do to kind of get ahead of some of these things from a what matters standpoint?
That's a great question. So I think just if you're looking at getting into business with a business partner, whether they're family or not family, like business partnerships can be awesome if they're the right fit. I might get this stat wrong, but I'm positive I've heard Gino talk about this many times. I don't know if the percentage is exactly right. So he's been doing this for 20 years, right? With 120 plus clients. And I think he said that about 40% of his clients were partnerships when they started. And it's somewhere in that, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's about 40% of those 40% end up parting ways through this process. And it doesn't surprise me that that's the case, because it brings clarity to your strengths. We talk about, do you get it, want it, and have capacity? And when you build out that accountability chart and figuring out who's in the visionary seat, who's in the integrator seat, and in a partnership, most often it's probably going to be the partners in those two seats. It's not always the case, because you could have a partner that isn't even interested in being on the leadership team, and that's fine. But through that process, so I think to answer your question is building out an accountability chart where you're clear on the structure and who's accountable for what. I think it's the E-Myth Revisited that talks about this, and getting clear on that right from day one when you're starting your business out, even before you hire the first employee. When it's just two people in a partnership starting a business, ultimately all of the same accountabilities exist. And so divvying that up and deciding who's going to look after the finance side, who's going to look after the business development or the sales, and who's going to operate, like, you ultimately have to share those until you hire your first employee. And maybe you start out with a couple employees at the beginning, but still, I think I would say starting out with some sort of vision for the future and clarity around accountabilities is probably where I would recommend being clear on at the start.
Have you ever seen like a shared responsibility in the visionary seat? I've heard this idea or this notion of the owner's box. And so it's easy to kind of put owners in the owner's box. And actually, I saw this functionality on 90.io where you can put more than one person in a seat. But have you seen where there's like two visionaries and it works?
So I haven't seen it. One of the things we always say, I had a client push back on me on this last week in a session, but one of the things we always say in EOS is that if more than one person is accountable, nobody's accountable. And so there's nothing wrong with having more than one person in a seat or in a box on the accountability chart. But if that seat has people reporting to it, then there can only be one person sitting in the seat. So we use that term, I think I mentioned it before, LMA, leading, managing, and holding people accountable. And if that's one of your roles in the seat that you're sitting in, then there can only be one person in that seat. So I say that, and I don't have any experience with a client with more than one visionary, but there's a podcast put out by EOS Worldwide called rocket fuel. And I am pretty sure in the very first episode, Mark Winters, who's the co-author with Gino on the book Rocket Fuel, and he interviews an EOS company where they have the shared visionary role, and it works there. And so it certainly is the exception, not the rule. I was a bit surprised that that's the podcast they started out with, because it was maybe a little bit confusing. But I think it's a rare scenario. Generally speaking, you want to have one visionary and one integrator. And then, the owner's box, which you've referenced, it's not even attached to the accountability chart. It's a separate responsibilities and benefits, or there's things that you have access to as an owner that don't necessarily apply to your seat in the dividends in the company, for instance. You get your share of the dividends. But that owner's box should be separate from the accountability chart.
And one of the things that you said was, as long as there aren't direct reports, there can be two people in one seat. Let's play that out real quick. Like, let's say, and maybe it's a small team, so I could see where that would be interesting, but let's say there's an integrator, and then they've got sales, marketing, and finance, and there's nobody that is all that great at finance on the team yet. And so there's two people in that role. If there's a KPI or performance metric that's missed, that whole notion of like one belly button to push, or all the other phrases that are out there, like, how would that integrator does the integrator hold both of those people accountable for those metrics and those KPIs? Or do you think the KPIs are kind of split based upon?
I would encourage in that scenario that you pick one of those two people to actually own the finance seat. Now, it could be the integrator. You can also have that one person sits in more than one box. There's nothing wrong with that. That's super common in it, especially in a smaller business, right? You could have a 3-person leadership team with 5 seats on the leadership team. And so a couple people are sitting in more than one seat. But when you talk about what we call the major basic functions, so you mentioned, I think, sales and marketing, operations, and finance, only one person should own each of those. And if there's not a clear owner, like if there's not somebody who has the perfect skill set to sit in that finance seat, it's just an issue. You put it on the issues list and you work to solve it, maybe next quarter, maybe next year, but you got to figure out who is the best person to sit in that seat in the short term, but it still should just be one person. And you're still working as a team. When we say that, what's important to remember is you're still always collaborating as a team, everything for the greater good. And so you're not sitting in a silo in that finance seat. You have the rest of the team to bounce ideas and challenges off of, and you work together to solve issues, but it should just be one person in all of it.
That was the biggest struggle that we had when we were rolling out EOS in Hunt to Killer, is people felt like personally attacked by airing their dirty laundry, like putting their metrics on the board each week and talking about it when they weren't where they were supposed to be. And like, one of the things that I would constantly focus on is like, while you're responsible and accountable for this is an issue for the entire company. This is not about you. This is about, we need to work together to improve that. But it's an interesting reaction, because it is very human to be defensive if we're not performing, especially if that's unaccustomed to not or to performing. But that's a struggle for a lot of teams, and it was for mine.
It is, and it's probably one of the most challenging things, I think, early on with a new team. So for one, I just talked to somebody about this morning. A lot of people, they hear that word. So we talk about an issues list, and so many people have a negative connotation to that word issue. And so I would encourage listeners, that word issue, when we talk about an issues list in EOS, it's not even always a problem. It's a challenge. It could be an opportunity, an obstacle. And so it's just an issue. And so put it on the list. There's no judgment attached to it. And to your point, yes, when you put an issue up because somebody didn't hit their scorecard metric this week, it can feel like a personal attack or like the team is challenging you. But this is where that whole concept of IDS, identifying, discussing, and solving, and that identify step, maybe there's a process that's needs to be updated or created or clarified. Maybe that person, maybe it's somebody else. I see this all the time too, where people are having to manage down a layer because they don't have the right people in the right seats reporting to them. And so you're never going to be able to have enough time or do a great job as a leader if you don't have the right people in the seats reporting to you. And so that identify step when you're solving that issue, digging down to what the root issue is, it's not necessarily because that person isn't good at their job. It's something that maybe a conversation with the team, you discuss it open and honestly, drilling down to what the real root issue is. And so often it's easily solvable.
And one of the other challenges that we had on our leadership team, so it wasn't just about when you're in the moment, you're talking about like on track, off track for your rocks, you're looking at the scorecard. And like if something's off track or has been off track for a while, or if there is a metric that is not performing, those are things where somebody, the integrator, somebody in the room will say like, drop it down. And so we drop it down, but everybody is kind of doing that as a team. We also had examples where someone would put up an issue, and not to like backstab or be that person, but like they saw an issue, and the purpose of the issues list is to stay out of everybody's hair for 6 days. And there's one day where everybody comes together, solve the issues, and then we go and we do our work. We come together again 7 days later. And so the purpose of the issues list is like when you see something, you log it, and then you talk about it when the day comes. But sometimes we would put issues on the issues list that were about someone else's department or someone else's team. Have you seen that before? And have you seen where teams are good at, was it just a heads up like, hey, I saw this, and just to let you know, I put it on the issues list, and maybe that's just like the human nature relationship side of it? Or should everybody understand that we're here for the greater good of the organization? This isn't about you, and like get in line or get out.
Yeah, especially early on with the team, I wouldn't necessarily say it in that language. What I've seen is there's typically a shift on the leadership team after their first 2-day annual. I don't know if you were ever part of one of those, but we spend a lot of time on some team health exercises, get the team to read the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And in that book, Lencioni talks about these 5 levels to this trust pyramid. And at the foundation of that is trust. And you have to trust each other as a team. And so trust is earned, right? It's not given typically. And it can be lost in an instant, and it takes a long time to gain it back. And so ultimately, working on developing trust among the team makes a big difference for how those issues, when they're presented, how they're approached, or how the person receives it. I don't know whose quote this is. I've heard it a couple times, and I've used it with teams lately. I think it's really good. And that is that when you are bringing up an issue or you're trying to solve an issue between people, it's important to make sure you keep the issue in front of you, not between you. And it's just a slight tweak, but it helps everybody focus on the issue, not personal attacks on the other person.
Interesting. It allows like everybody can point to the issue instead of across from each other or side by side and say like, that's what we're here to solve. That's super interesting. One of the other things, and especially with the book and the first kind of annual, one of the exercises that I appreciated most is for the greater good of the organization, for the betterment of the organization, what's one thing that you can start, one thing you can stop. And like, you were letting it all out at that point. I thought it's an incredible exercise to build trust.
Totally. I would say it's one of my team's favorite exercises in the 2-day annual. And one thing you see as an EOS implementer is different levels of, like, you'll have team, we get them to rate themselves right on those 5 areas of the pyramid, the 5 dysfunctions pyramid. And you'll get teams that everybody says they're 8s, 9s, and 10s or whatever. And then you get to that one thing exercise and it's very shallow. And then you'll have other teams where you can tell there's tears, there's vulnerability. And that's just really cool to see. And it's the teams that are willing to go there that typically get a lot of value from that first day of the annual. And it sets up day 2 for a much deeper and better day for sure. And the whole journey going forward typically changes from that point on. So
I thought the worst part of that whole exercise or that whole evolution, that maybe this is selfish or maybe it's about me, but I thought the hardest part was going to be receiving. And if anything, like I love receiving feedback. Like I want to know what to start and what to stop. The hardest thing for me in those sessions is telling other people.
is giving.
Yes. I don't know. Like that was unexpected during those.
But it's super common. I hear that all the time too. And so part of it is, as uncomfortable as it is, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Most people do want constructive feedback, but yeah, the person giving it can be awkward and uncomfortable. That's sort of the feedback sandwich, right? We always give them a positive thing to build them up before to tear them down. No.
Yes. Yeah. Someone called it an Oreo not too long ago. And like the good stuff's on the inside, or what we're really trying to get out is after we build you up. Okay, John, so someone's been listening to this recording and they're like, I want John to be our implementer. How would they get a hold of you?
The simplest way probably is by email. Jon, which is actually Jon, no H in John. It's short form for Jonathan. And so Jon, Jon.Weening, Weening at EOSworldwide.com. That's probably the simplest.
Awesome. And then where are you located? Because this is kind of an abnormal one. And do you take virtual clients?
Currently, I have one virtual client. So I'm based in Barrie, Ontario, which is about 45 minutes north of Toronto. Actually, I'm a little bit unique as an implementer. I do a lot of travel. I have clients in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Halifax, in Quebec. But I am focused. My 5 most recent clients are all here in Ontario. And I am trying to take no more than 1 in 4 that is a travel client going forward. And that stemmed from COVID, where it didn't matter where people were located because they were virtual sessions. And so the short answer is yes, I do take on virtual clients, but I am based in Barrie, Ontario, Canada. And the sweet spot is probably an hour and a half radius of that. So
does that get you down to Niagara Falls and maybe like into Buffalo?
Buffalo is probably 2 hours away.
God, that's too far.
And there's some great implementers in Buffalo. So,
all right. Last question is, if you could have beers or coffee, tea with any EOS implementer, who would it be?
Well, that's a good question. We are a pretty tight-knit community. And so the reality is that you could almost make that happen with anybody that you wanted to. So the one that comes to mind, and maybe it's the obvious one, but it's Gino. I've got to meet Gino several times at our QCEs. We get together every 90 days, but they're short conversations. It would be really cool to sit down with Gino over a coffee or a beer for an hour. And I'd love to pick his brain on some of his family business experiences, because this all started with him, with his father and himself in business with another partner, and him realizing that his dad was a visionary and he ended up being the integrator. Ironic, he also is wired more as a visionary, but his first visionary integrator experience was as the integrator for his father, who was the visionary in their business. And so I would love to talk to him about some of those early years prior to him even creating the EOS system. So
that's awesome. Jon, thank you so much for coming on and having this recording session. I've got so many notes from this, and I can't wait to listen to this again. Like, one of the things that stands out to me right out of the gate is what matters most, and really getting that clarity up front before you get into business and how powerful that can be. And he talked about like the idea of either implementing EOS or using EOS as a framework as you're thinking through business, even if you don't have employees, to really help you get out of the gate.
Can I just add one thing that, never came up, but it is an additional piece of advice to that new business owner or partnership? And that is the importance of core value alignment. That was a game changer in our business. It's one of the most exciting things that I get to do with teams. And it's right up there with being clear on accountabilities, is make sure that your business partner is a core value alignment with you. It's probably number one, actually. So
we're going to extend this just for half a second, because I do have a follow-up question to that, which is one of the core values exercises is to, especially once you already have an operational company, it's to close your eyes, think about 1 or 2 people that just exude what your company stands for, what your organization stands for. When you don't have that many people, or if you're in startup mode, or if it's just early days, the first couple of years, do you think that the core values of a company is really just the core values of the founder or founders?
I would say early on, like, it is definitely driven from, if you're 2 people starting out a business, then I think discovering what your shared core values are, what's important to each of you. It could be that you've discovered you're in alignment and there's your foundation for your core values going forward. It could be that you realize you're not in alignment and maybe this isn't a good idea. But yes, so inevitably in an established company, it shouldn't be a democratic process. You involve your key leadership team. And sometimes there's somebody on that leadership team that through that process, usually it doesn't happen right away, but it could happen over time, that you realize there's somebody on the team that's not a fit. But yes, I would say in a startup, it's going to come from the founders of the business for sure.
Got it. Awesome. Well, that's going in the bonus episode. I'll mention that early on and I'll get people to listen all the way through. So, Jon, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's been great.
Bye.
Take care.
Confessions of an Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for Confessions of an Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.